Good morning. Welcome to the meeting of the Mayoral Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm the Scrutiny Officer. I've been conducting the first item on the agenda, which is the election of chair. Before I do that, I have to advise you of evacuation procedures. If there is any alarm or a fire, it's a very unlikely event. If there is, please follow somebody, an officer who has a lanyard and an ID fob. We will escort you out of the building, and please do not return to the building until you're advised to do so. Okay, the first item on the agenda, following the resignation for work reasons last year of the previous chair, we are now going to go into electing the chair for this meeting. So do I have a proposer for chair?
I'd like to propose Councillor Thomas as chair.
Okay, do we have a seconder for Councillor Thomas? Thank you. Okay. Can we have a vote by show of hands? Okay, thank you very much. That's carried. So I now hand over to Councillor Thomas.
Welcome on this bright winter's morning. We're going to start with a minute's silence to commemorate International Holocaust Day. And we're joining people around the world in remembering the 6 million Jewish people who were murdered during the Holocaust and millions more killed by Nazi persecution. On 27th of January 1945, which was this day 80 years ago, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazis' largest death camp, was liberated. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we also remember the victims of more recent genocides around the world. In Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in Darfur, in Iraq and Syria, and remind ourselves of the continued suffering of Jewish and Palestinian people in the Middle East. This evening at 7 p.m, the Holocaust Memorial Day UK national ceremony will be shown on BBC One and iPlayer. At 8 o'clock, people will once again light the darkness with candles displayed in their windows to remember the victims of genocide and to stand for a world of kindness, tolerance and peace. So if we could have a minute's silence, please. Thank you. Thank you. Could I start, by welcoming the Mayor and by welcoming the new members of the committee, Councillor Clark and Councillor Morgan, welcome. Can I ask for declarations of interest, please? Any declarations of interest? No, unnoted. So we're over to the Mayor's question and answer session. Unscripted questions. He hasn't had the questions beforehand, so he's on the spot. So can I take the first question, please? Okay, I'm going to start then. I'm curious, Dan, to know what your, obviously we've got the papers that we're working through today, what your priorities are for the the last few months of your mayoralty.
You need to press it on. Yeah, it's that one there. Okay, can everyone hear? Okay, well, hello everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. That was rather belated Happy New Year, still in January, I think. Joe, I mean, obviously, what I'm trying to do is to make sure that I achieve as much of my programme as possible in the last remaining months, but also to make sure that the new mayor is able to hit the ground running, because that's obviously important, because we don't want to have a gap. We want to minimise the time it will take for a new person to orientate themselves, because at the end of the day, it's not about mayors or our organisation, it's about the people, and we've got to make sure that we have that continuity of delivery. Because my huge concern, I say this as a former government minister in part, is that unless we are able to show delivery in our region, we will disadvantage ourselves for future resources from government. We know what the government's priorities are about growth and other forms of delivery associated with that growth. But what is incredibly important is that we can point to examples of delivery, because that's how you get more money.
Yeah.
So you're only as good as your last project, really. And we need to get all those projects that are on the cusp of starting work and happening to be in place.
Thank you. Toby.
Thank you, Chair. So building on that last question, and with reference to the report from the chair of the Independent Improvement Panel in the papers today, it appears at the moment that they've given up hope of the best value notice being lifted prior to the end of your term. What are you doing sort of personally to ensure that your successor is best set up to remove the BVN as soon as possible?
Okay, well, look, I think I have a very clear view about this, and this is contested to say, but my view was there was never a need for a best value notice. That was also the view of the person coming in to oversee this process. When they came in, they weren't sure why there was a best value notice. Unfortunately, when that happens, there is a time that has to pass so that people can reassure themselves of that fact. So we are in that process, I'm afraid. And let's remember that this relates to a period of time that actually included the previous mayor's term and the first part of my term. So this is quite historic stuff, and it's very frustrating, not least for the reasons I've given about delivery, to find that we are having to deal and put our energies into this when we know exactly what needs to be getting on with. And in fact, that is happening. It's just that we have to go through this process. So it's frustrating, but it is what it is. You'll make your own mind up if you think the announcement of that just prior to me becoming a general election candidate in a very high profile seat has got anything to do with it. I have strong views about that. You'll guess what they are. But the important thing now is that we are out as soon as we can be, and we're definitely on course for that. And all the noises, both public and private, are that we are on course. We're doing exactly the right things. Things are very different to the snapshot that this all refers to for some years ago. And therefore, we're in a strong position to move out as quickly as is possible. But at the end of the day, we are subject to rules.
Mark, Councillor Weston.
Thank you. I noted what you said about we're only as good as the next project, and you want to get projects that are on the cusp. Forgive me, but from where I sit, what I see is a lot of projects that are stalled, delayed, dithering around, and in particular for me, it's rail. It just seems to take for absolute ever to do anything, and any progress that is made is so glacially slow that I'm starting to wonder whether my son, who's just turned 10, will be able to board a train and pay an adult fare at any point coming out of Henbury, for example. I think I questioned it last time as being like the quest for the Holy Grail. It's permanently out of sight, and I'm seeing that now. So rather than the projects that are just on the cusp, would it not be better to try and complete some projects we've actually started?
Well, Mark, I couldn't agree more. I'm mystified. One of my first sort of thoughts as becoming mayor was, why does it take so much longer in our country to deliver on rail projects, never mind anything else, but particularly rail projects, because you'd think that other countries' experience would be pretty good comparators. If they can do it so much more quickly than we can, why is that different? You've heard what the Prime Minister said about this and his strong views that are not always welcome, but probably very necessary for the country to have that growth if we want to be able to pay for the public services that we think are important. So what I do, though, I would say, though, however, but while glacially slow is probably an accurate assessment of the last 100 years, it wouldn't be an accurate assessment of the last year or so, because we've had 2 railway stations built in Bristol. The first in nearly a century, I think it was 1926. Parsons Street was the last one. We've got the Portway station, obviously in Bristol, and we've also got Ashley Down, and there are others that are on the cusp.
Sorry, coming back on that, both stations you mentioned are years late. And actually the ones like Henbury and Filton North, or whatever it'll be, Brabazon, are also now running years late. In fact, I think Henbury should have opened 3 years ago. It always seems to be just down the track, pun unintended. So yes, we've opened some up. and we should pat ourselves on the back, but they were delayed as well. And without you actually connecting the whole thing and looking at other projects like the Henry Loop, we're never going to fully embrace the opportunity in rail.
Well, look, one of the things I like about you, Mark, is your candour. So I think we do deserve to pat ourselves on the back, but we need to criticise the previous government for those delays that you just mentioned, because that is the reason. And we had things to do with various initiatives, didn't we, where there would be questions at the last minute that we hadn't seen, that came out apparently out of nowhere, that would say, why haven't you done this? Or where's the money for that? Or we need more. So I'm hoping that we will put that behind us, but we have achieved more than any generation in the last 100 years. So we should acknowledge that, because I believe you need to be positive about these things, and we need to be able to point to those successes to get even more. And I think there are other stations that we certainly need. I think you and I will be very much in accord on that in the near future and the medium term. And the way we do that is by pointing to what we've done and pointing to what we're about to do and making sure that's a success.
Thank you. Councillor Wells, Toby. Oh, sorry. Can I go to somebody who hasn't spoken yet? Ed. Yeah, Councillor Pocock.
Hi, Dan. I wanted to ask, is there a formal process of collecting data and feedback to ascertain and measure how successful the birthday bus pass scheme has been in achieving a mode shift in people using public transport more than before it was implemented?
Thank you. Just let me have a drink.
No, of course, yeah.
I've got a frog in my throat. I'm not absolutely certain how we measure these things in terms of that's for other people to do that and produce data and one thing or another. What I can say is that birthday buses as a scheme was, of course, quite strongly opposed by some people. I've always felt confident that it was a necessary process, a policy to meet a set of varied and difficult challenges, not least getting modal shift, getting people to make fewer car journeys and more public transport journeys, to deal with the congestion. Is it because that one's on? To deal with the congestion that causes our economy to not expand as fast as it might, because people have got to get to the places to where they need to work, etc. Also to deal with the environment. I mean, we need to reduce CO2 emissions. That can only happen if we get fewer people driving cars and more on public transport. So there's a whole range of things that birthday buses have been very successful at. And what I would say about these things is it's sometimes quite difficult for politicians to be objective. And I include myself in that because, you know, obviously we invest in certain ideas and we want to see them come to fruition. But perhaps the best measure is how the public are voting, how they are judging it. And at the moment, they're voting with their feet by using birthday buses. So I think I'm right in saying something like 136,000 journeys were made very recently, I think the month before last. That's the highest monthly usage of birthday buses. It's on course to be more successful than it was last year, very clearly. I think it's very, very important that the new mayor is able to get their head around that kind of data that you're alluding to, so that they can make a judgment about it continuing, I hope, in the future. But it is something that is of interest to the rest of the country. It's of interest to the government because it's a success and it's making a difference. And perhaps most importantly, it's cost effective, because what it does is for every pound we spend on it, we get 1.2 pounds extra benefit on top of that. So it actually helps our economy as well as helps our people get around. And a personal thing I would add is I'm very proud of it because it helps the poorest in our society. In our region, like lots of regions outside of London, people who are on lower incomes tend to use buses as their means of transport. In London, it's slightly different. You see, you know, public transport's a different thing there. And what we know is that there's been a huge uptake by the very poorest in our communities. And if you think about that, they could save 1/12 of their travel costs approximately by using their birthday bus thing at a time of a really difficult cost of living crisis. It's not gone away. It's still very tough, as some of the data that's coming out today is showing. That is really important too. So it's dealing with those who are more wealthy, who need to change their behaviours in terms of car driving, but it's also helping the poorest, it's helping the planet as well, and it's helping our businesses. So I think it's a successful policy. We must make it even better still.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ed. And I think having that data on an ongoing basis will be really helpful. Thank you.
I suppose, just to follow up a little bit on it, was, and I suppose what I'm trying to wheedle out a little bit is are we seeing a sustained mode shift? Is this leading to people using public transport more permanently? Say, I take your point on the poorest in society using public transport more. They are using public transport as their main form of transport. How are we getting people out of their cars? I suppose on a kind of, you see in Europe more that people will use public transport as their main form of commuting and maybe only use their cars for longer term travel, going on holiday or going to the shops on the weekend or something like that. So how are we getting people that cars are their main form of transport to actually say, no, actually the bus service is really good and I'm going to use that during the week to get to work rather than taking my car into the city?
No, well, that's a really good point. I mean, what I know is that we are getting data that shows there is modal change. And that's important because the whole point of birthday buses is to basically break the taboos, people's prejudices, prejudgments about what our bus service is like, because actually there's some very good bus services in our city and our wider region, despite the headlines where inevitably there are difficulties and challenges. And once people work that out, they think, hang on a minute, this is a better option than using my car in certain places, in certain circumstances. And they want to do that because that's common sense, that makes sense, but they won't know that unless they try it. It's, you can read about things, you can hear about things, but actually that opportunity to do something and then say, yeah, that is a better way of doing it is what brings about behavior change in the longer term. So it's quite exciting. I mean, what I would say though, is I've been very impressed by how most people, most politicians and most observers of birthday buses have been pretty objective about it. Now, I think Councillor Plowden was critical when it was first announced because he said that he thought that, that was part of his, I think, scrutiny role at the time. He thought that it would be benefiting richer people to the detriment of other groups in society. But of course, that is partly true in the sense that people with cars tend to be more well off. And we want them to change their behaviour. So this is a multi-policy policy, and it needs to be, because it needs to get people out of cars who tend to be more wealthy people. It needs to help the very poorest, which it's certainly doing. I mean, some people have made 260 journeys in a month on their birthday bus pass. I don't know if they're living on the bus or whatever, but they're making an awful lot of journeys. So that shows that it's making a big difference to certain groups in our society, as well as helping our businesses, because we must remember that we have terrible congestion in our region, and that's a big impediment for our businesses to make money and get growth, as well as helping the planet, obviously, because if you're reducing CO2 emissions, that's got to be good news. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, so coming back to the best value notice, I know I'm a bit of a broken record, but it's really important because at the moment it's preventing your successor from getting further devolved powers and more control over the budget. On the theme of workplace culture, there were a number of actions in the transformation programme that were closed at the beginning of last year, 2024. And you often refer back to, the things that happened under your predecessor and maybe at the very beginning of your term. But there was a mass exodus of the senior leadership team at the end of last year. And there's comments associated with that raised in the latest report from the Independent Improvement Panel. So will you take some kind of ownership of the issues that do still prevail in the organisation now that you have been in the lead of it for 4 years now? So it can't all be down to your predecessor.
Well, I think all these things, you have to look at them in context. And if you've got an agenda, you're going to use words like mass exodus rather than there's been a new chief executive come in who understandably is going to look at the structures and make sure that those structures are fit for purpose in the future. So when you look at the figures about staff turnover, they relate to senior staff making decisions about structures. They obviously coordinate with me and liaise with me, and they have to get sign-off. Don't forget this, they get sign-off from all the political leaders. It's not something that is, I arbitrarily decide, as is implied sometimes by people's questions and use of words like mass exodus. It's actually a proper process that's very thorough. It has to be very thorough. It has to be very fair. It has to be considered. It has to be provably so. It has to go through sort of delays so people can properly scrutinise that. And then above all, it has to get political sign-off, which is very, very important. And at every stage that's happened, any of those instances that you cited. What I would also say is I think I'm right in saying, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, no doubt, is that I think if you look at the general turnover in the combined authority, It is very typical of other organisations that are like it. There's nothing exceptional. It's just that we've had 2 reorganisations effectively, which is inevitable when there's new chief executives.
So obviously, bus companies are private companies that seek profits. There are many areas such as my own ward, which are very isolated. They have an older population, perhaps some population with more disabilities. And quite often bus companies will decide that these areas are not profitable to have bus routes in. And so they have, especially in my own ward, cut bus routes. I was just wondering if the birthday bus pass scheme has actually increased the viability and therefore the profitability in these areas to protect the bus routes of these areas which are quite isolated already.
Okay, well, hi Zoe, how are you doing? You're right. Look, I think the answer is yes. I'm not quite sure about what quite your question is, so maybe I'm getting it wrong. But what I think I can say to you is that birthday buses has got more people on the buses. Certainly when we look at pre-pandemic levels of bus usage in our region and we compare them with other regions, we are doing much better than other parts of the country. We're doing very, very well. Now, it was a tough time, the pandemic. It had huge impacts on people's behaviour, working behaviour in particular. Many more people now work from home remotely, as we all know. So that has a direct impact on making direct comparisons. You have to factor that in. But we are still doing well. And that's because I believe, in part, birthday buses is encouraging people to take up buses when they find out that many of the services are fantastic and can be relied on, and then use them. So we are seeing that. It is more of a challenge in places like your ward, where you may have age demographics and other things that are unique to those places that make the service that you would want to see difficult to provide, because we have private operators whose main motivation is profit. However, that's where subsidies come in. And one of the things that has been difficult in our region has been that the leaders of the councils have historically kept that at the lowest level in England. And of course, they froze it not so long ago, a few years back, 3 years ago or so, which has not been helpful, to be frank, because I would have had more power to be able to say, well, look, Zoe's ward has got this particular challenge. We need to focus in on that part of Bristol for these reasons. And we've got the resources to do that. So that's where we're kind of weaker. But look, I'm an optimist, eternal optimist. You know that probably better than most. I believe the new mayor hopefully will have opportunities in the future where some of those things can be addressed. And obviously I'll carry on doing that as a member of parliament for the local area too. Okay.
Thank you.
Have you found that alternatively the Westlink service has also been good in encouraging people from these more isolated areas to get around, go to the shops, go to their, churches and things like that? Because I know that's obviously a request service almost, that you kind of book your slot and then the bus comes and takes you to where you are. Have you found that's been more effective than just providing subsidies to these areas where even if you provide thousands to a bus company, they very well may not keep that bus route open?
I mean, Westlink has got a variable performance, frankly, and it depends which part of the west of England you're looking at. So in the north part of the region, it tends to be more successful and more utilised. Remember, it is an experiment. We're learning as we go. On-demand bus services are a funny, challenging thing. I think we've had particular challenges and we could have done things with the benefit of hindsight better. But of course, that's why you have an experiment, because you learn from that experience. I was at an event in Parliament last week, chaired by your friend of mine, Alex Mayer MP. And it was very interesting because we were hearing about all the different experiences of all the different operators doing these kind of services up and down the land. And what I think it's fair to say is that we have got things that we could learn from them as well as them learn from us. So I think it could be a lot better. Would I have introduced it? If I was advising the current Labour government, I would certainly do it very differently to how it was given to me as the mayor by the last Conservative government. I think there was quite a lot of wastage of money. I think the timelines weren't appropriate. I think some of the parameters that we were allowed to operate in were very narrow. I think in light of that experience, you wouldn't do that again. But that's for the new government to work out.
Can you potentially elaborate on those challenges and what you would do to improve the service if you were obviously staying?
I think we'd have smaller zones. We'd incorporate railway stations and other key places like hospitals from the outset, and that was not possible, unfortunately. So I think you know we've had to learn that. I wish we didn't have to learn it the hard way. I wish people had just had the foresight, because it doesn't seem like rocket science, if I'm frank. And despite what people think, when you're the mayor, you cannot do everything that you want. You have to abide by the rules that the government gives you and sets for you. So you know, that's what we have done. But I think this kind of transport does have a future, but you've got to understand that it's within narrow ways that it can provide better services for people like in your ward or other wards that are similar. And we have an interesting region, of course, because we have fantastic, great cities like Bristol and Bath, but we also have the most rural, you know, communities like Denlock, Thrubwell, in my constituency now as an MP, for example. They're very different. That's quite a lot of diversity. Not many mayoralities are as diverse as ours. And this could be a solution to some of those diverse challenges. But it has to be done quite cleverly, I think. And I'm not sure that the previous government had their head around that enough, because it's a lot of money they gave, and I'm very grateful for that. But I think if I knew then what I know now, we could have done even better.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Nice to see you all.
So the next part of the meeting is the public statements. For those people who've asked written questions, the answers to those questions have been posted with those questions on the Combined Authority website. So we've received 5 statements, and I'd like to invite the people who've submitted the statements to speak. And can I remind you that you've got 3 minutes to speak to the committee, and we'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds left. So can I just check? Councillor Duncan Hounsell, lovely. David Redgewell, Joanna Wright, Councillor Joanna Wright, not with us, okay. And Amelia, yes, I can see Amelia's here. So can I start with Duncan Hounsell, please? And the written statement is in your packs, members.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel. I want to talk about the Wecker Bristol Bath strategic corridor proposals, in particular the Keynsham bypass and bus lanes. I spoke to you in September highlighting the mediocre benefit cost ratio, poor value for money for the overall scheme. Most of the claimed benefits are not economic. Indeed, the calculation involves some negative numbers for economic efficiency, which is contrary to the government's wish for economic growth. The phase 1 proposals are planned to be completed by March 2027. The cost is about £26 million, of which 21 million is planned to be spent in the financial year 2026-27. Predicted average bus journey time savings in the 2 sections from Hicksgate to the Globe, eastwards 1 minute 44 seconds, westbound 41 seconds, and that's less time than I've been speaking. Now, particularly unpopular are Wecker proposals to introduce bus lanes on the Keynsham bypass. Concern is about the practicality of the proposals, not the aims. Every candidate bar one in the Bain-Salford ward by-election held a week ago last Thursday, with a 42% turnout, was against bus lanes on the Keynsham bypass. The resistance on the doorstep to bus lanes was palpable. This confirms the public opposition to the proposals. Buses are held up in the urban areas of Bristol and Bath. I urge you to seek changes to the proposal for bus lanes on the Keynsham bypass. Consider alternative ideas such as 2+ lanes, a rationalisation of bus stops to increase bus efficiency, or easier access for buses onto the roundabouts. The Mayor spoke about delivery. Your project budget is tight, so use the funding elsewhere on other aspects of the A4 scheme. Don't close lanes on the Keynsham bypass. The Keynsham bypass has served its purpose very well for 50 years. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. David Redgewell.
Thank you, Chair. So, David Redgewell, I'm also the Passenger and Equalities Rep on the Bus Advisory panel for WECA and North Somerset. So the issues that concern us at the moment are the transport levy. Transport levy is paid by South Gloucestershire Council, Bristol City Council and Baines. It goes through the budget process at those councils. It's a legal requirement in the WECA Act under supported services. It also has a contribution from North Somerset, although at present they're not a member, but they run the joint bus service improvement plan together as they do with Metro West. That's been frozen, as Dan has just told you, for the last 4 years. Meanwhile, bus drivers' wages, salaries, maintenance, costs, and delivering services rise. This is the only combined authority that's actually allowing that to happen. The others precept, every other mayor has precepts in England. We don't, because obviously that was not in the Act at the time. But we do need to raise that finance. Otherwise, come September, when we do the review, we won't be cutting stuff in April, but come September, there'll be a cliff edge. First, we'll go community transport, and secondly, we'll be looking at removing bus services. Now, Bristol's very successfully going to put back more bus services in South and East Bristol. I thank the work of WECA officers for that, and with particularly Councillor Ed Plowden and Tim Rippington, who've led that work. And it shows we can work together. But bus services are very important. Westlink is, as Dan said, a demand responsive experiment. It works. It works sometimes and not others. So it's certainly not a replacement for scheduled bus services. Some councillors seem to think of all colours and persuasions. So I'd urge you to look at that in the budget, and I should be talking again to all the councils again, including North Somerset. And by the way, we need to proceed with that membership. And I'm told now, simply clear by Lord Hendy, the reason North Somerset can't come in is special measures. So we need to come out of that special measures. Otherwise, we will be the smallest combined authority in England. We will have Wessex, which will be Somerset, Dorset, Bournemouth, Christchurch, Wiltshire, and possibly Swindon, and maybe even Gloucestershire, become a big arc around us with a powerful mayor. We've got to look at that. It's about regions, about policy, it's about getting money. On the issue of the bus priority measures, we need to start building it. That money runs out in 27, and I don't believe you're going to find Rachel Reeve or Heidi Alexander up the road being very sympathetic unless we start building. On the rail projects, we do need to manage them. And on Metro West, we got a contract with First Group Chief Executive, and we need to make sure they're delivering those trains we're paying for. We're seeing too many cancellations of services, and I hope we're not paying. I do regret Malcolm Parsons going back to Network Rail. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And unless Joanna's here, over to you, Amelia Melville, please. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very good to see buses and looking at options being on the agenda for this committee, so glad to see that. We are looking ahead to the mayoral election on the 1st of May and aware that, as Dave Redrow said, that WECA is still under the best value notice and is in the process of developing a more functional constitution that will work. And we really strongly urge you to complete that work before the election so that the new mayor incoming can get on with doing all the things that the mayor needs to do, having ambition for transport and economic development and skills, etc. That's what the mayor should be doing, not spending their time dealing with a constitution that doesn't work. So really, really urge you, from our perspective, campaigning for better buses, to sort out all of the constitutional issues ahead of the election and have a functional organisation that the new mayor can come into. Also, on the bus priority measures, the value of bus priority should be measured in terms of reliability of buses, not just how many minutes on average have been saved, and thinking about the reliability during rush hour and the economic value to the region of people who are not able to drive for whatever reason, having the ability to rely on a bus to get to work or school on time, which currently isn't available to many people. And having good bus priority measures is very well known to be the thing that enables buses to be reliable and to run more cheaply, which is better for the affordability of buses for the whole region. So yeah, from our perspective, implement the bus priority measures.
Thank you. So that concludes the part of the meeting relating to public statements. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of September 2024. Can I ask for any comments on the minutes, please? And then I'll seek a proposer and seconder to move them as accurate. Any comments? Councillor Hodge, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just have one comment. We brought up in the last, and it was mentioned in the minutes that we might receive the papers a little bit earlier. In total, at least 360 pages of papers to read, and I think we did receive them about 24 hours earlier. So thank you very much for that. But if there's any possibility of having them even an extra day, it's very tight, only having 2 working days to get through all that and consult your colleagues. That was one point. I did have a second point about in section 5 in the chair's announcements. The chair considered that the Grant Thornton report should come to the committee, and I just wondered if there's any update on the conclusions on that.
Do you have any comments on that?
I have to come back. I don't know quite what report that is. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, and can I echo those thanks for the earlier papers and note the kind of continuing request for, you know, the sooner we can have papers and do pre-scrutiny, the better our decision making will be. Thank you. So if we can note those comments for the minutes, and could I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Peat. Seconder for the approval of the minutes. Thank you, Councillor Pocock. So minutes are approved. I don't have any announcements that I particularly wish to make for the committee. I would note that we're going to be looking at diary dates, aren't we, for the adult education college visits?
Yeah. Yes.
So we'll do that in the body of the meeting, so people have their diaries with them. So we're on to the bus improvement paper. Which was a paper which Councillor Wells requested, and I believe that Jess Lee and Ben Mosley are here to talk to this paper. Thank you. Are you okay to sitting apart? So there is a chair there. Okay. So
shall I just very briefly introduce the paper and then?
Yes, please.
Fine. So the paper, as you said, Chair, responds to a request from the committee for an update and overview of the work to date on bus improvement. It sets out at the start of the paper where we are on the commissioning of an options assessment for bus improvement, and the report there outlines how the scope for that piece of work is virtually agreed now between us and the unitary authorities. There's a couple of revisions required following a discussion with directors of the unitary authorities at the end of last week, but we're aiming to finalise that this week, and we have a route to procurement that will mean that we are hoping to get out and get the work underway by the end of the month, which would be great. Paragraph 4 of the paper sets out the headline areas that the piece of work that we're commissioning will cover, and obviously we'll bring back the outcome of that piece of work to the committee as it develops. The rest of the paper responds to the request to sort of outline all the work that has been done to date in this space. So it's a sort of timeline of events, if you like, with links on then to other papers from previous committees to outline the work that's in place there. So that's what the paper does, and we're obviously, Ben and I are happy to try and handle any questions.
Thank you. Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Only to say that we are having regular meetings with the transport portfolio holders in each of the respective unitary authorities, their meetings which I chair, and we're working very closely with those portfolio holders to ensure that the scope reflects their wishes and the ambitions for the project.
Thank you. So questions, if I could start with Toby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I hope you don't mind me going first as the person who sort of originally pushed for this paper. I have to say I'm a bit disappointed with what we've got. I know it wasn't the two of you who were here last time at the time the request was made, but we were led to believe that there had been significant recent work specifically around the current options available, i.e. franchising, into the background and the challenges that would bring. But what we've got in this paper is everything that's happened since that last committee, which is good, and I'm very happy to see that the wheels are now turning. And then some historic initiatives on the theme of buses and perhaps precursors to franchising, but not really the kind of work that we were expecting to be shown. So either there wasn't much work done, and someone was stretching the truth a bit at this committee, or there is work, but it hasn't been shared with the committee. I'm not really sure which one of those it is.
So I must apologise, I wasn't at the last committee, so I don't know what was said. So we can, I think Ben and I can really mainly talk about, where we're going from here. I think in advance of the last committee, there would have been a series of workshops between the combined authority and unitary authorities to look at what the options might be. But I think what we're seeking to do now is to undertake a piece of really considered work that will formalise all of that and set out the pros and cons of all the range of options. So I think this is where we are now, and we're looking forward. But like I say, not having been here, I'm sorry not to be able to respond to that.
Okay, understood.
Ben may want to come
Yeah,
in.
sorry. I think that is a fair challenge. I think from my reflections, when I joined the Combined Authority 12 months ago, the issue had been stuck in the mud politically quite a bit. One of the things I had to do when I first joined was write a report for leaders reflecting the various angles various leaders were coming from on the position of franchising in particular. There's a whole spectrum of views on this. What that report did was help broker the next steps which the committee took last year. I think without that report and without being able to support leaders go into the process with all eyes open, I think it would have been very difficult to do. But I think we would accept that progress hasn't been as quick as we would have liked it to do, but we are making up for lost time now.
Okay, thanks for that acknowledgement. I do appreciate sort of the honesty there. I've got some technical questions, but I'll save those for a bit later and let other people speak. But just one point for now on the subject of how Scrutiny can get involved with this process. We often speak here about Scrutiny is best done up front, and not when the final paper comes to committee, and that we're not really affecting sort of the direction of travel. Noting that this work, which I think is about to be launched with Arup, is due to deliver in the summer, could I propose, with the approval of the rest of the committee, that perhaps we could have a working session around May or June, so after the election, so we won't be in a pre-election period at that time, and I would imagine the work at that point will be developed enough that there will be something to talk about, but not finalised, so there will be something to influence. How does that sound? Thanks.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is a kind of request that's been made for a kind of a working session on this in May, June of this committee, of a kind of a pre-scrutiny approach on this. And Stephen, you wanted to say something as well.
Well, I think Ben has covered it quite well, and your challenge is entirely legitimate. I mean, the meeting on the 16th, I believe, I think that was 4 days before the committee meeting on the 20th, where that funding was approved for the work you've got in here. And I think we need to be really open with each other. This is a moment of a reset, both in terms of a strategic, discussion that we can make productive with political support from all sides, and a tactical one around the current use of funding. And as members of the public have said earlier, Dave mentioned a frozen transport levy in cash terms. That makes it incredibly hard to separate the tactical from the strategic. And when the public interest is so high, we have to recognise, we've just spent the last 2 months trying to agree a budget. So capacity is always consumed on the urgent, and this is important. And this paper, I think, is a real opportunity to say this is the reset. The scrutiny should be early. We've got to give ourselves a chance to have the conversations that need to happen about a long-term plan, and not get constantly pulled back into the here and now And that's really what this feels like to me as the chief exec. We are also out for 2 new senior officers. Part of your earlier comment, there has been change since, in fact, that 16th September meeting. We have 2 senior posts, one for buses specifically and one for transport more generally, that we're currently recruiting for. So there's lots of change coming, and what we need to be able to do is to be consistent, avoid false dawns, and have a process that you can see and which the public can have confidence in. Clearly, May is an interesting time for us with a new mayor, so we'll just need to talk to an incoming mayor about how they want to play it. But being under no illusion, we understand how important this piece of work is and how important public scrutiny is of that as well.
Thank you, Steve. Did you want to speak?
It was just to manage some expectations regarding a workshop. If we could do it in June, so we've got some time to engage with a new mayor, that would be really helpful from my team's perspective.
Mark, thanks, Weston.
Yeah, I would echo the comments.
Mic's not on.
Yeah, I would echo the comments that Toby's made. I wasn't quite sure what the report really gave us, if I'm honest about it. I would suggest, I think June is perfectly sensible, and it'd be good to have that free. It might be worth, though, offering a half-hour Teams briefing to scrutiny members. When it comes to May, often we see membership of this committee shift. And actually, if the workshop's going to be useful for everybody, everyone needs to have the basic knowledge about what BSIP is and everything else. Otherwise, they're going to walk in the workshop and be blindsided by jargon and abbreviations. So workshop is brilliant, but a half-hour quick evening briefing potentially with any new members or even current members, just so we get best value out of it, would I think be helpful. And if we're being honest about it, that might be good to have a couple of briefings on wider issues if the membership changes.
I'm more than happy to facilitate that as well with the team.
Thank you, Mark. And if we can kind of slightly take that offline, because what I'm hearing, the requests from members is for greater engagement and understanding, and to be able to focus in on this area. So quite how we organise things, I think we need to take away and balance with the election, etc. But certainly hearing those requests. Zoe.
Will the feasibility study include specific rural service guarantees to prevent resources from being disproportionately allocated to urban routes with already a higher ridership?
So I think we absolutely, the feasibility study will look at the balance between rural and urban and the challenges that presents. We can, so yes, what it'll conclude, I don't obviously know at this point, but it will certainly look at the questions about how to ensure that that services are provided to all of our residents in a way that is sustainable, what the options are for that.
Further questions? Councillor Hodge.
Thank you. As my colleagues have said across the table, I was a bit surprised actually again with the paper that it obviously launches a feasibility study, and it was very useful to have the timeline of what has happened previously. But and I appreciate why you couldn't offer more, but I was expecting more from the paper. I'd just like to bring forward some comments my colleagues have asked me to raise. Have more involved in this area, but I also wanted to note that improvements in the comms with the unitary authorities in the light of the BVM, we have seen improvements, and I wanted to thank the officers for their efforts in respect of that. And one area in particular that seems to be working better is the BSIP informal members briefings. So I've had feedback that is working a little bit better. So there's 3 points I've wanted to bring forward. There's a little bit of confusion, I think, possibly around West Assess, and where that transport members, I think, wrote about 8 months ago requesting an in-person meeting on West Assess to have a say in shaping the expenditure of future BSIP funds. And a concern now, just want to, because there is this feasibility study, the replacement for that, and with the West Assess projects being wrapped up, where does that leave that opportunity? Is that fully picked up by this study? The second point is in relation to, you mentioned that other combined authorities have been contacted around benchmarking for bus reform. And again, I think members had asked for a briefing on what this is transport members have been asked for a briefing on what other combined authorities were doing around franchising, and that hasn't seemed to come forward. And finally, a little bit of feedback about the enhanced partnership not really working very effectively. Feedback that when it continues, that when we come forward with concerns about commercial services, transport operations feel that there is nothing they can help with in that respect, and there's a feeling that they should be able to exert some influence over the operators. So those are the 3 points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the last point around the enhanced partnership. So one of the things which we have now changed for the next enhanced partnership meeting, and it will be a standing item going forward, there'll be a standing item on performance, and this will give unitary authorities and ourselves the opportunity to raise directly with service providers where there are performance issues. Now, of course, we don't wait for those meetings in order to do so, but I do think it's a good forum in which to raise those concerns and to listen to the points of view of the providers. I would say that if we did move to enhanced partnership plus model, which has been sort of suggested as an alternative to franchising, that the performance element of these meetings will really need to be strengthened. And that's something which, even before we get to that point, if we do indeed get to that point, we can start now and ensure that performance is a standing item on the agenda, which it is going forward. With regards to Assess West is essentially a data tool, and it's there to really help support the mayor and members of the committee to understand where investment in services should be provided. I had my first presentation on this 2 weeks ago. I think it's a really powerful tool, and I think it will help politicians to really have a quite informed, data-led conversation about where investment should be provided, and how do you meet your objectives. The data will be able to help you make those decisions. I think we could do a better job in airing what Assess West is doing and what it has done and what that tool looks like. And we are going to, I think we have arranged for a meeting with the transport portfolio holders to see that, and I'm more than happy to make that information more widely briefed as well. So,
shall I just come in on the point about the other combined authorities and the approach that they're taking? So we can absolutely provide a briefing that outlines what's going on elsewhere to members. That's no problem at all. So my apologies that hasn't been picked up, but we can certainly do that after this meeting.
Thank you very much. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Zoe.
I think it might be just best if I get all my questions out so you don't have to hear me speak again. So firstly, with the significant dependency on the forthcoming legislation, how are we going to implement mitigations in case of delays or changes that could impact the reform timelines? Next is the report acknowledges that full reform could cost millions, and yet only 500,000 has been allocated for the feasibility study. How will we ensure sufficient funding for implementation without placing the financial burden on residents or local authorities? Next one is, given that the finite nature of the 105 million BSIP funding, what long-term financial strategies are being developed to ensure improvements are sustainable once this funding is exhausted? And lastly, given North Somerset's non-membership to the combined authority, what specific measures are being taken to ensure seamless integration of bus services across the administrative boundaries?
Shall I have a go at a couple and then you go? So in terms of how national level legislation impacts on the timeline for reform, I think it's a bit of a wait and see, but that'll be one of the questions that is factored into the options appraisal piece of work. So we're very alive to that, and we'll ensure that we're clear about exactly what the legislative impact will be. The question about the amount of money that's been allocated for this phase of the work and then what happens next. So you're right to say that in other areas, the implementation of a franchising approach has cost significant amounts of money. We haven't yet concluded that that's the right approach for us. Obviously, we're doing an options appraisal at this point. I think as the work proceeds and the options are clear, we will then need to take that back to our committee for them to consider what the funding available for the next phase of the work is. So it sort of depends upon the outcome of this phase of the work, I think. And on the point about North Somerset, we obviously they're not part of the combined authority, but we are working with them. We sharing our approach with them to ensure that everything is consistent. But that this piece of work covers the combined authority area because that's the area that we currently operate over. Ben, are you all right to?
So just with regards to North Somerset, I meet with the team there every week. We discuss a range of issues, including bus reform and BSIP 2. We are aiming to be as aligned as we possibly can within the confines of finances and politics. And we continue to have a very close working relationship. With regards to the BSIP and BSIP 2, we're working very closely with unitary authorities to identify and understand their priorities for that funding. And we're working closely with North Somerset as well to ensure that there is a commonality in the offers which we are providing people in the region. So, for example, care leavers, we want to provide the same offer to whether you're a care leaver in North Somerset, to whether you're a care leaver in the West of England Combined Authority area. And that's why we need to meet each other very regularly to ensure that there is that collective approach.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, you somewhat preempted one of my questions earlier when you mentioned the new director of buses. So I was going to ask about what organisational changes the combined authority is making to gear up for greater control of buses, whatever form that takes. So perhaps you could expand a bit more on that role and if there's any other changes.
I mean, obviously, as you say, we mentioned in previous meetings that we are going out for some senior posts, and one of which is that critical role, which is currently played by an interim senior former bus company professional. You'll know Bob Scowen, many of you. And so the person we're looking for is going to be someone who can both lead on this work around the strategy and be an intelligent client for whoever we need to bring in to help us with the work on the options. We obviously can't predict what a committee might decide in terms of the future model, but you will have heard people talk about passenger transport executives as a potential option to improve the way the governance of the bus network runs, and obviously those exist elsewhere around the country. Indeed, that's one of the things that we'll be looking at through the study. So we need to keep an eye on the future and potentially see whoever's coming in as the person who can help us build whatever that new governance arrangement is, which could be carrying on as we are with a team of over 100 people who are working in this authority on operational day-to-day delivery, bus timetables, routing, all of that stuff. It's all done by people who are currently employed to a completely different model. You know, you'll obviously be aware of TfL, Transport for Greater Manchester, and there are other versions of that. So the future is uncertain. We need a leader and we need a group of people who are capable of helping us chart that whilst maintaining a quality service with the funding we have right now. And at the moment, I would say that's what takes up a huge amount of the collective senior management time. It's kind of keeping going. So we need strategic leaders. I would just add, Chair, if I may, that it would be worth looking at the news of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's Combined Authority Committee decision, which was made, I believe, a few days ago to continue its journey on a similar path. And there are good analogies around there. We've got some good recent case studies. So I think, you know, we're in a reasonably good position, albeit I'm disappointed that we're behind other places. It means we can really learn from them.
Thank you. I think we're drawing to a close on this. I mean, I would just like to say, with kind of Chair's prerogative, I think what we're looking at on page 14 on the kind of what the final report will cover is sort of 5 bullet points. I think at this stage, it would be good to have, these are the kind of key bullet points of what our outcomes are going to be from this report. So I think members should pay particular attention to that, and probably, perhaps send back comments to myself if they want, other things covered here. And I think what I would pick out particularly is, what we've got as kind of bullet point number 5 is set out the reform options. My fear here is that we've got a menu of options that aren't costed, and then the next piece of work is the piece that looks at what the costings might be. And I would really hope that actually we've got, particularly given the length of time we've been waiting, that we've got a half decent understanding about what the price tags are associated with these different options. So I'm not quite sure when these terms of reference for this report are going to be fully defined, but what I'm seeing at the moment as those 5 bullet points doesn't feel that it's going far enough to actually get us something that's going to be as helpful as it could be, given how long we've waited by the summer. So, I would encourage members to look at that feedback in the first place to myself, and just make sure that we've got terms of reference for any kind of external reports or team working that gets us where we need to be in the summer. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ben and Jess. There was a request for a comfort break of 5 minutes, which I'm going to suggest is after the adult skills policy landscape discussion, if that's okay. So I believe we've got Stephen. Lovely.
Morning, everyone.
Floor is yours.
For those I haven't met, I'm Stephen Basher, Director of Economy and Skills. Just going to provide a very brief overview of the paper in front of you today. So firstly, what the paper does is set the Adult Skills Fund in context. So it describes the overall portfolio of work we do to support employment and skills in the combined authority. This portfolio has increased significantly in the last few years, from around 20 million to 60 million per annum, supporting over 17,000 residents through various things. And just to summarise that, we have an employment and skills plan which sets out the evidence base, our labour market, and we deliver through a range of methods: commission training, career support advice and services, and measures to help simplify access. You have in your papers a list of all of the programmes, and that's going to grow as well. And I'll talk about 2 additional programmes in a moment. But the Adult Skills Fund itself, which we've tried to describe in a succinct way, because it's a complicated programme, but we've tried to show impact in terms of how it's reaching residents. This was devolved to us as a combined authority some years ago. And it's basically to support residents with foundational basic level skills, particularly levels 1 to 2, but also 3 as well. So that's up to A level. And we have a commissioning strategy for adult skills, and we prioritise learners with greatest need in terms of those that are either unemployed, have the lower prior educational attainment, and concentrated in some of our more deprived areas in the region. So the paper sets out some of the reforms that we've put in place to make sure that that's more targeted, measures to make ESOL training fully funded, for example, and other measures to help incentivise delivery in deprived areas. We set out also in the paper a proposed visit to really bring that to life, to meet City of Bristol College, which is our single most significant provider of Adult Skills Fund, and also South Gloucestershire Community Learner, to give you a real feel for how that works in practice, what that means for individuals, and how it's run. Finally, just wanted to highlight to the panel 2 new programmes which we're currently working on. The first being the Youth Guarantee. So we're one of 8 Mayoral Combined Authority areas. It's been selected to be a trailblazer from April this year to deliver test and learn approaches to helping young people aged between 18 and 21 into what government terms earning or learning. And that's a particular focus on those not in education, employment and training. And we know in the west of England, in terms of our rates of NEET among young people, it is above average. So there's real value to be had in this trailblazer. It will be a £5 million investment over 12 months. And that will then inform we think a longer term rollout of a youth guarantee by government across other areas. And the second is Connect to Work. It's not a devolved programme, but it's one that as a combined authority we're delivering alongside other local authority areas across the country, particularly focused on supported employment, those facing barriers to work, those are economically inactive, through disability, health, mental and physical. And through that programme, we're looking to build on some of the architecture we put in place already that you can see in the paper, such as Skills Connect, supplementing that with specialist support, health support, working with the NHS, the ICB, and doing that to help those individuals back into work. So yeah, very happy to take any questions and also suggestion of the visits. It'd be great to get that in place.
I've read the report, and as been mentioned, it's 300 pages of documentation, so I might have missed something. And what I saw was a definite emphasis on NVQ level qualifications, and 2 projects dealing with blue sky research, the Quantum Innovation Technology Centre, I think it was, and one other. There seemed to be a gap in the middle. And for clarification, I work in engineering, and we see a continuing and ongoing skill shortage of degree level engineers. So I just wondered whether you've got anything in place to address that kind of middle ground, where we've got local employers who really want to grow, but are really suffering from a skills shortage of suitably qualified potential employees, in the immediate area or even in the whole of the UK. And, you know, we are potentially having employers going to overseas, which is not an easy recruitment process. So is there anything that the authority is doing in that intermediate area of identifying where we have short-term skills shortages and encouraging our local educational institutions to address that? Because I know certainly the University of the West of England used to be very focused on this area. They had the Computing for Real-Time Systems course maybe 10 years ago, and I think it was just too expensive, so they dropped it, and that cut off a significant stream of engineering graduates. So I just wondered if you had anything in play to reverse and encourage our educational institutions to address the needs of industry in the area.
Oh, yeah, happy to answer that. I think the observation is correct. As if you look at the value of our skills spending, it is weighted towards level 1 and 2, and that's just how devolution's worked to date. But I would say that the skills bootcamp programme does get closer to that missing middle, as it's described, at level 3 and 4, and that's employer-led. And we've had particular success in that programme in particular sectors, and that's growing year on year as well. So we've just had confirmed allocation for next delivery year of around 12 million. So it's getting bigger. The other thing I would mention is the Institute of Technology, which has been led by Western College today in partnership with the University of West of England. We're not sure at the moment through government policy what the future is for institutes of technology, but we think that could play a really important role in the future. So I think there are things there. We work very closely with Business West in terms of understanding the skills needs of employers, and Business West led for the West of England on a local skills improvement plan. Government's now given combined authorities joint sign-off of that plan, so we'll be working very closely with Business West in the future as well to understand where those gaps are, and that will give you that kind of real-time intelligence as well. And we think probably through things like the Youth Guarantee, where we're able to test and learn from different approaches, there may be things we can do there to incentivise employers to take on young people in this case. So I think the weighting has historically been that way, but I think there are additional policies and programmes which will help us in terms of addressing that middle, as you identified.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen, you want to say something? Just to add the context, which is, I think, the question about how we design our skills system is a very topical one, and Mayoral combined authorities are in discussions, as you would expect, with sort of pretty much every spending department about what does devolution mean. In the area of employment and skills, I'd say there is some frustration in other areas of the country, certainly, that's been vocalised, particularly Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, around the sense in which there's still far too much fragmentation, and it feels a lot more, it's far too difficult to access the right skills if either you're a learner, and we all know what that feels like, any of us who've
had young people in our houses trying to work out what to do with their lives and work out what this course will do for me in terms of a career, and recognizing the huge change in the job landscape. So the courses of today and the jobs of tomorrow, it's bewildering. It really is, to work out what the right course is. And an employer's view, which is often exactly what you just said, David, that I know there's a need here and I can't get that need met through the existing system. I think there is a sense in which devolution could play a part here if it's allowed, and that conversation is really live. You know, if you added up all the money that is spent in the skills system in the west of England, and you ask yourself, what are the outcomes that we're buying as a system? Nobody could actually answer the question. And that's part of the problem. And if you have a devolution conversation that says, well, can we get businesses, providers of training and political leaders in the room and try and work that out for ourselves? I think that might be quite productive, but it feels quite a long way away even now. There are changes, you know, we've got the change to the apprenticeship levy. Was it half of that money has gone into, in effect, the skills system, but it's not yet clear how that will work to answer the question you've posed. And, you know, we're a long way from Whitehall.
To Weston.
Thank you. I've got a couple, if that's okay, Chair. One, I think, fairly straightforward. At point 6, you talk about proposed visit sessions to City of Bristol College and South Gloss. Now, with greatest respect, I'll probably go to the City of Bristol College for fairly obvious reasons. I'm a Bristol councillor, which does sort of beg the question, how come there aren't any visits arranged to Bath College for colleagues from Bath and North East Somerset? I mean, they're welcome in Bristol. We don't ask them to show passports, but I just thought possibly their own educational establishment might be more pertinent to that. But I'll let them fight that corner. The one that I wanted to touch on is I was reading through the Adult Skills Fund, and you talk about the goals and destinations and everything else. And there seemed to be a bit of a gap in there. Often when I speak to various forums in Bristol, it tends to come out of the sort of BME forums and things like that. It's talking about where they need assistance to go from the sort of one man, one woman band kind of thing, and they start employing people. They need that assistance on how you become a boss, not just how you get promotion in the company, because if you are the only person in that company, it's more how you take people on. Is that in the innovation and business funding that's mentioned in the economy and skills funding overview? Am I looking in the wrong spot for that kind of business assistance?
First of all, I think we'd be delighted to add Bath College. I think we wanted to start with two visits, but I'm sure they would be very happy to welcome Scrutiny members to see how that's playing out in the Bath area. I think in answer to your second one, yes, partly that is the business support piece, and that's why we have those two things together, functioning within the combined authority. And there are various things that we're doing to support small businesses around workforce development. We ran a program called Workforce for the Future back along, which had some success. I think there's more still we can do, and with a particular focus where we find a gap around leadership and management skills in small businesses. That tends to be the thing that also holds back productivity. So I think it's joining the two things up. It's where we are. But it's a very good observation.
Sorry, if I may, also looking at the delivery MSOA in region map, I love a good map. Obviously, it's showing the areas where you are doing the most training. It's that one.
That one, yeah.
There are obviously large areas which don't seem to have any take up at all, if I'm reading that correctly. So I'm just wondering how you intend to go into those areas with low take up and promote that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it may be that the numbers are there, but they just don't show up on the map because they're not as concentrated. I think if you overlaid that with the index of multiple deprivation, I think you can see that it's been targeted in the right areas. And certainly the other data would suggest that in terms of the learners, they are in our more deprived areas. I think that's worth us having a look at, seeing there's more that can be done. I think sometimes it's about where that learner is attending the learning as well, and that's obviously particularly concentrated around college and other areas.
Right, so it's not where the learner comes from, it's where the learner's attending a course. Is that
I'm reading that as delivery postcode. But it would be, we could probably do an analysis to compare the two as well, just to pick up your point.
I'd be interested if you could.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Peat.
So how are the programmes going to ensure equitable access for older workers who perhaps need to reskill or support in adapting to new employment landscapes? And how will we address the digital exclusion for residents who lack access to internet or struggle with digital literacy in rural areas?
Good questions. So I think I'd say for Adult Skills Fund, that is of course available to older people, and you can see that, you know, in terms of where that's most concentrated at the moment, it is within 26 to 49, but there are, through some of our programs, community learning, for example, opportunity for older people to engage, and that's often done in a community setting, so it's more accessible. I think on the digital, we do have something within Adult Skills Fund, a digital entitlement, which enables individuals to have the kit, essentially, to be able to access learning if it's online. And I think through the pandemic, our learning was that there was an ability to invest more in that side of learning. So I think there are things in there which do that, but yeah, probably something we can continue to push.
And what success metrics are going to be used to ensure that we're actually reaching these people?
So what we do within Adult Skills Fund is we set strategic priorities in terms of those learners which we see are most in need, and we are able to provide that support, and then we track the destinations of those individuals as well over time. Sometimes the impact of that training will take a few years for us to see the impact in terms of better employment or earnings potential. So we have a system of being able to track all the individuals that are funded through Adult Skills Fund, all those multi-thousand individuals through that system, and ultimately to assess that impact over time as well. So we're beginning to get data, because this has been going for 5-6 years now, so we are getting that data coming through now, destinations, and that comes through the providers, and we work with the providers to ensure that positive destination.
Thank you, Steve. Toby, and then I'd like to say a few closing comments unless anybody else has got anything which they'd.
Thanks. Quite a general question. So I'm a member of Bristol's Economy and Skills Committee, so I see a lot of the skills programmes coming forward, some of which are kind of WECA coordinated and some of which are sort of local authority specific. How coordinated are you with your counterparts across the region, and openly, how consistent are we with sort of service delivery across the region?
I'd say it's much improved. We have a really good working relationship with the local authorities. Skills leads come together on a weekly or fortnightly basis. The directors come together monthly, and this is an area where we've seen really good collaboration. So one of the projects highlighted in the paper is something called Skills Connect. That's our kind of regional one front door for skills access. There are spokes in each of the local authorities, so in Bristol's case, and they all join up, and that's real progress because it helps the learner. So there's that collaboration in terms of delivering on the careers coaching and support, but we also directly commission activity as well. So, for example, Bristol City Council are a significant provider of Adult Skills Fund as well for their community learning. So we work with them in different ways, but it's, I'd say, a very positive collaboration. The employment and skills plan, which is the basis for our delivery, was supported by our committee 2 years ago. So we have that kind of political buy-in as well, which is really helpful. So I say it's really good. And also I've been invited to attend the Bristol One City Economy and Skills Board as well, so we can ensure that link up.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, but Councillor Hodge actually had her hand up to me.
Yeah, just some quick questions on the data that I wouldn't mind understanding. It was really nice to have the metrics before us, but I didn't understand a number of the details. And sorry, the distinction learners and aims, it's not an area. So when you have a number of learners, I can understand for each local authority, is it, what do you mean by aims? In fact, because that's the basis of understanding this data. And also I had a few questions about the demographic groups. I just thought it was interesting that so many, for such a big proportion, that age is not known. I would have thought enrolling on a class that you, or a course that you would might provide one's age. And I was a bit concerned that the low proportion in the 19 to 25, and I expect there's an explanation for that, even though we have that identified problem with NEET. And then the category that's 26 to 50, your learning requirements in that range, I would have thought would be so different at the outset to work and further down in work. And it would be almost nice to see, because that's the big column in each of those, in that demographic, how that's split down. Finally, what's LLDD learners? I'm not aware of that abbreviation.
Quite a few questions.
Yeah.
I might need to come back on some of that detail if that's okay. I'd say just generally on the learners, that's obviously the individual and the aims. In terms of what that learning is, will be several aims associated with a particular course. I can come back there and give you an example of what that means in practice, if that would help. But the other points you raise, yes, on the demographics, there of course are gaps in data. There always are. We rely on data through our providers, and in some cases more robust than others. So there will always be some gaps, but we're looking to try and address that and to strengthen all the time. And I think for the 19 to 25-year-olds, I think that is a fair comment, perhaps something that the youth guarantee can consider as well. That's lower obviously than the 26 to 49. There may be a number of reasons for that. And yeah, something that for us to consider. I think, particularly as we know that, as I said earlier, in terms of individuals not in education, employment and training, in that age group is significant compared to the regional average as well. And I'm sorry, I forget some of the other points. Was one around the definition. I
can send an email afterwards, that's fine.
Should we do that? Okay.
Thank you. Toby, did you have a final comment? No. I was going to make exactly the same comment about aims. I'm slightly concerned that you have to go away to come back to tell us what aims actually means in this context, because this should be really straightforward to understand. I
think you said
any learner has several aims as part of that course. What I said I would suggest I do is if I bring that to life with a case study to say this is the course and these are the learning aims, that will bring it to life.
Okay. Okay, I'm still not quite clear enough, but for further exploration, in terms of, I mean, what we're seeing is wonderful analysis on, who the people are. Can we also look at kind of what the long-term impact is on employment and outcomes? I mean, given that you're providing that to funders, having a sense of actually how we are helping people on their journey, and in that spirit, I think is also, can we get user satisfaction surveys of what actually the people who are taking these courses think of them? Do they feel that they're being helped on their employment journey or their skill development journey by the courses that we are paying for? So that then we're getting, customer satisfaction surveys, basically.
With regards to the employment skills plan, it's just around demographics. I just wondered if there's anything in that or special provisions for people who are ex-SEND or ex-looked after children. And in previous years, you actually had a small budget for women as well, and I couldn't see them highlighted throughout, but I might have missed it.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson.
Absolutely. We do have specific programmes, both those areas. So I'm happy to come back with the detail on those as well. Probably just not visible within the highlights table, but certainly on SEND, we've worked very closely with local authorities, particularly on that cohort. Yes, absolutely as well. And certainly through the Adult Skills Fund as well, you can see that there's in terms of the balance of demographics, that's supporting females more than males. But there are other things that we've put in place specifically to try and reduce the equalities gap as well. So I'll come back with a bit more information on that for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And on reflection, I think Jill, it might be better to sort of suggest some dates for the visits outside of this meeting. Yes. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'm going to propose if we could have a 7-minute comfort break. So back at a couple of minutes past midday, that would be lovely. Thank you. introduce the work plan. So we could have quiet meetings restarting. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Mark Wakefield. I'm the Head of Democratic Services. So this is the work plan item in your pack. So it responds to the sessions that we had in the autumn to identify areas of interest for scrutiny, to have more in-depth briefings. Obviously, you've had some of those today, but in addition to that, we worked on some briefings on the budget, as well as some environmental updates that you've had. Earlier on today, obviously, we'll pick up some of those comments that you made, particularly about bus reform, the adult skills, long-term impacts, etc. So there's items that we're identifying all of the time. Looking further forward, we've got things around potentially English devolution and the March committee coming up. But of course, straight after the March committee, we go into the pre-election period. So that's why I haven't set out a really long-term forward plan for scrutiny, and really calling on the members of the committee to give us some steers on those items and the timing that we'd like to work on, obviously with the chair. So I won't hold you up further. Hear your suggestions.
Any comments on the work plan? Did you want to say something about the bus service improvement?
Well, only that that was one of the items that we picked up from the conversation earlier on. Not just that, but also follow up on the adult skills item as well.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Councillor Wells.
Just to say, as a general point, I don't think the pre-election period and the election should stop us from planning beyond that point. I think scrutiny shouldn't be at the whim of whoever happens to be in the hot seat at the time. The membership of this committee might change a little bit at that time, but a lot of the members, I'm sure, will remain on the committee. So I don't have any specific points right now, but I think it shouldn't stop us from planning ahead.
Thank you, that was a good steer. Mark?
I'd agree with Toby, actually, because if we've got that fallow period where we're not allowed really to do in-depth scrutiny in the pre-election, we could use that period productively by planning what we're going to do, rather than come back in May, June, and then plan what we're going to do. We've actually got a window there where we can do it then. You know, what briefings do we need? What's coming on the horizon that we know of? We'll have a bit more news about the devolution deal, BSIP, and all the rest of it. So I personally, it can be done online, relatively informally, whatever, but we can use that window to plan how we're going to do the rest of the 12 months.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. Any other comments? No. Thank you. In which case we will move on to the papers for the meeting for the joint committee and the combined authority meeting on Friday. And in my email over the weekend, I suggested some of those papers which we might want to concentrate on. The first of those was the budget and medium-term financial strategy, and I understand that someone is able to speak to that.
So I'll quickly intro it. So I'm the acting director, Solange Russell, here at the Combined Authority. So I've got some of the finance team members with me here today. So we've got John Alsop, who is the interim head of finance, who's actually going to give some headlines and overview of the paper. James, who's our senior business partner, and Andrew, who's a financial analyst, who are going to be here to also help with questions and any detail that you may have. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Solange. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So the main purpose of this paper is for the MCA committee meeting on Friday to consider and approve the budgets for the combined authority for the 25-26 financial year and the separate budget for the mayoral functions. The report also includes the medium-term financial strategy for the period to March 2029, the capital budget and capital programme, an update on the revenue and capital outturn forecasts for the current 24-25 financial year, and a number of financial strategies that have already been considered by the Audit Committee and who have recommended them for final approval. These include the Treasury Management Strategy, the Capital Strategy, the Non-Treasury Investment Strategy, and the Minimum Revenue Provision Statement for 25-26. In addition to the approval of the budget and financial strategies, other recommendations in the paper include the approval of the allocations of £25 million of highways and capital grants and £6.7 million of pothole funding to the unitary authorities in 25-26, noting the development of an organisational improvement plan, a recommended option for the future delivery of ICT services, and noting the report of the Independent Remuneration Committee, and to delegate to authority to receive additional bus service improvement funding and to approve its allocation in consultation with the unitary authorities. Members will be aware that it is a statutory requirement for a local authority to set a balanced budget, and this paper proposes a balanced revenue budget for 25-26 and a fully funded capital programme. The Section 73 officer is required under Section 25 of the Local Government Act to report to the authority on the robustness of the estimates made for the purposes of the calculations and the adequacy of the proposed financial reserves. And the report confirms that the Section 73 officer considers that the budget to be robust and based on appropriate and reasonable assumptions, estimates and calculations. The committee set a target balance for the general reserve of 5% of budgeted revenue expenditure, and this was based on a recommendation from Grant Thornton, the external auditors. The report shows that forecast expenditure is covered by available funding over the lifetime of the medium-term financial strategy to 28-29, so the future activities of the authority are balanced and affordable. 2025-26 will also enable the authority to bring the level of reserves into line with this 5% target for the first time, although we are forecast to drop below those levels in future years. Other key themes drawn from the paper are that the authority is growing with an anticipated 62% increase in grant income over the previous year. Staffing costs are expected to remain flat over the same period, showing efficient staff management. We have sufficient budget flexibility to respond to future opportunities. We have an ongoing aim to strengthen reserves, and there is an intention to create a £1.7 million fund in 25-26 to support an organisational improvement programme. This will be created through management-led efficiencies to drive transformation and will enable recurring savings in future years, which will support the financial sustainability of the authority going forwards. And here to take any questions with James and thank you.
Thank you. So, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was a good summary, and we did do an informal budget briefing for overview and scrutiny and audit. So thank you.
Thank you. Can I take questions, please? Oh.
There'll be no shock to any colleagues of mine. It's going to be about rail, so apologies on that one. Yeah, I can hear Joss's eyes rolling. You talk about Metro West Phase 2 and my obviously much longed for Henbury Station. You talk about how the Brabazon is potentially delayed because of the new station requirements and how this might have an impact on the budgetary requirements, and whether it needs accelerated funding or not. So who am I directing the question to?
If it's about transport, I can pick it up.
It's the budget implication on it, so I'm not quite sure where that sits.
So we have people in the room who know all about the project and
excellent
and the money.
All right, so on that side of things, it says that they don't yet know whether it's going to need accelerated funding or not, and if it does, then it's going to exceed the budget. It looks like the arena which the station serves has been delayed. So if it is delayed, will it need accelerated funding? If it had accelerated funding and cost more, would that bring it in before the arena was built? Because the whole idea is they came on board online at the same time. So I'm just wondering whether there actually is a budget implication or not.
So I think perhaps it's not really it's a program project question with a financial, everything's about money.
Always.
And the answer to the question is we're working very, very hard to accelerate this program because it's in a key part of our growth, the region's, one of the region's priority growth zones. If you look at the economic potential and current performance of that part of our region, and you look at what's holding it back, you know it's transport. So with or without an arena, that station is vital. There is purpose-built student accommodation going up next to it. So we are going as fast as possible, and the options are very much being kept live under review. We're having workshops with Network Rail, GWR, and DFT. So there is pressure. There is pressure on the budget because of inflation, because of the upgraded security requirements post Manchester Arena. So there's a lot of things have changed, and as you say, sometimes this should be measured in geological time, not real time in terms of stations, which is why we've done a series of workshops which I think are bringing forward, yes, you heard it here, bringing forward the opening date of that station, but there's risk. So we're working real time now. We don't have an ask in terms of a budget, but we're going to have to be extremely creative in terms of how we pay for it. But we don't think it's just about the timing and its alignment with an arena. It's much more about our overall economic story.
Okay. And if I may, just one question on figure 6, and I'll give way. It's got a budget line there, Great Western Railways, 139,000. Could someone tell me what that is?
Figure 6.
Figure 6. Figure 6. There, you've got GWR, 139,000. I'm just wondering what subsidy GWR is getting for what?
We'll have to get back. We'll
take it offline. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Other questions? Councillor Hodge.
Yes, I just had a question about it's interested to hear about the 1.7 million for the organisational improvement programme, and I just wondered, has work to be done to put some value on the anticipated savings that you're hoping to generate from the programme?
I should probably take this too, as it's got my name against it. I mean, the programme is being baselined now, so it's being finalised. What this budget obviously has to do is give us the headroom to build something, and it will be coming back to a future committee, as is indicated in another paper in this committee, where it talks about the same thing, and it says we'll come back to you and we'll give you more detail on the governance. In terms of the savings, there are some basics like project management, like our finance systems, like just basically building a more resilient, robust and slicker organisation. There are some things that as a function of our very fast growth, we just haven't been able to get to. You know, we've quadrupled in size in terms of our headcount in 4 years, and some of that was during COVID. So there's just a lot of the basics that need to be done better. The question about efficiency is a really tricky one, because and what we will do is we'll bake into the improvement programme the bureaucratic language benefits realisation. In other words, we will set out up front what we're looking to measure, and then we'll come back and we'll see if we did it. So the efficiency measures will be in it. There is a broader and more significant point for me, which is that the funding model of the organisation that is reliant so heavily on the interest we earn on the money in the bank, which again is in the document, is inherently, you know, it has an inherent risk attached to it, which is the faster we spend the money, the less money there is to pay the staff, which is obviously a bit strange when you think about it in terms of what that might do to a culture. So the efficiency has to serve that purpose too. We have to find a way and bring it back to committee to say, well, how are we going to run this organisation on a sustainable footing? But the measures will be set out in the plan that will come back to the committee.
Okay, thank you. But I'd just like to point out some headline figures and then ask a couple of questions. So we've got an overall budget this year as an authority of 232 million that we're spending on revenue and capital, and that's rising next year to 380 million. So that's quite a significant increase. I also note that on page 56 that we've got 110 million of grant funding. I'm curious, does that cut across both revenue and capital, or is that on just one of those budget headings?
I have to check where the that 110 million grant funding comes from, but yes, it will cut across both revenue and capital. Oh, sorry.
Just
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. On page 57, it talks about the number of employees that the authority has. It would be really helpful to have a breakdown just to understand the authority better. What's the composition of those employees? If that could be given to us, that'd be much appreciated. I've got a question about the adequacy of our reserves, because it seems that we've got about 18 million in reserves on a budget of 380 million. 18 million doesn't actually sound like a great deal of money. And I've heard you speak, Stephen, about some of the kind of budget overruns that we're experiencing. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the adequacy of the reserves.
Well, it's probably right that our statutory officer says something, but I will come in on if that's okay.
Oops. Yeah, so John did reference it. So it's something that we are working towards. So the recommendation from Grant Thornton was that we have 5% of our total revenue budget, which is 173 million, which would work out to be 8.5 million for our general reserve, which is what we are aiming to do for 25-26. It will be the first time we reach that target. So outside of that, yes, it's earmarked reserves that have been underspends on reserves that have been put aside. But in general, it's something that we need to work towards over the medium-term financial strategy.
The 5% figure might be familiar to councillors because it is a general SIPFA guidance for local authorities. And I think it's just worth reflecting the difference between this authority and a local authority. And in particular, the fact that we have very large programs with sort of long lead times that mean that when you really think about it, you have the ability to flex and adapt what you do if you can sort of see 2 years ahead. So it's not quite the same scale of risk and problem as it would be if you've got a heavily sort of statutory revenue heavy program, because we are delivering capital and we are delivering, frankly, in uncertain times. I believe that as long as you see 2 years out, you're more likely to not worry an auditor. However, it is worth noting that we're 10th out of 10 in terms of mayoral combined authorities on most of these metrics. So something needs to be changed, but it's not an emergency.
This might be more of a kind of like a HR question as opposed to like a finance question. I know that prior to the pandemic, local authorities offered, lots of benefits in terms of like flexible working and stuff like that, which now has become commonplace across the board in the private sector too. I was wondering if the West of England Combined Authority is having recruitment and retention problems as well, like local authorities often are.
I should probably refer that to the head of HR. She's obviously, unfortunately, not here. We are retaining a hybrid working approach. We aren't saying, come back to the office 3-4 days a week. And as you will know, for many local authorities, that's been a bit of a godsend in terms of recruitment, because you're recruiting from a bigger pool. I think from a recruitment point of view, one of the great things about working here is effectively the fact that we have so much going on that is exciting. And I am picking up, certainly in the recruitment that I'm involved in, a really strong positive response from the market across a broad spectrum of jobs. So I think we are better placed in the main than many local authorities are. As I speak from my own experience at Bristol. Sometimes that was really tough. And I think we're in a fortunate place by comparison.
So you're not finding that there are any excessive costs due to unfilled vacancies?
We definitely have our problems with vacancies. Yes, it's particularly in those sort of big heavy lifting programs where you know that 70-80% of our budget is large capital projects in transport in those areas. They are tricky. And no doubt there'll be other areas, perhaps finance would be one example. But I think one of the things we are going to do as part of this improvement plan is we're going to look again at our delivery model, because we have grown by fourfold in the last 4 years. That's eye-watering numbers of full-time employed people. It was necessary because you see what's happened to the budget. There is a legitimate question about the delivery model and whether, you know, the balance between the full-time staff and the commission work we do. That's not to say we're going to change our tack, but we also recognise that, you know, if our budget's grown by 64%, if our headcount grew by the same amount, we'd have to get a bigger office, as they say, and we're not planning on doing that.
Is it worth, I'm not sure if West of England Combined Authority does this. Obviously at Bristol City Council, we have the exit surveys where we look at, you know, why people are leaving and potentially ask questions of what would they have done differently or what could we have offered to, you know, retain them. If that's not already in place at the West of England Combined Authority, is that something that we can get in place?
Yeah, we do that in place. Yeah,
Right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge, and then we need to be slightly picking up the pace, but with a 1 o'clock hard stop. But I might be chairing a bit more firmly.
Okay, thank you. Just two brief questions. One was just I'm not just getting to grips with these figures for the first time, but looking at the table Appendix 3. And apologies if this is explained in the narrative. Supplies and services up 121%. I just wondered what the driver was in that figure for next year's budget compared to this year's. And also, I just had for information a question about contingencies in the revenue budget. So, how do you deal with a contingency element? Do you have a sum in there somewhere that is overall for all service areas, or is it built into high risk delivery areas, or is there an element of rebasing in certain budgets as a contingency provision?
Who wants to answer that?
I think the significant increase in supplies and services is largely due to the increase that we've got in grant income. So there's a couple of key schemes or key funding areas where we're going to be the delivery partner. BSIP will be a good example of that, where there's an extra £10 million near enough, which is the Australian Supply Services. So it's due to that.
Thank you. We've also got the under the finance heading, the investment funds programme and the grant assurance. So that, which is kind of item 10 in the papers. Is there anything that you want to say to sort of speak to that at all?
So that's a separate paper. We've got the head of grant and assurance, Pete Davis, here, who can speak to that one in more detail if needed.
Is more detail needed on that to members?
That's for the committee. Is there any questions on that one?
No. Okay, I'll take that as an opportunity to move forward a little bit.
Sorry, could I just ask one more question?
Sure.
I did have my hand up earlier.
Oh, sorry.
It's related to the independent remuneration panel's report that's part of the budget report. It recommends that a job description is to be written up for a deputy mayor. Is that an action that's going to be actioned? And when is the target for doing that action?
So, I mean, the subject of the deputy mayor is actually something that the independent improvement panel, which is, as you know, constituted as part of the best value notice process, has discussed, and they met actually last Friday, and I think it's fair to say reached an agreed position, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share that with you in due course. But essentially, we will obviously need to take our steer from them and from the new mayor.
Can I just come back to Councillor Hodges' question, which I think got skipped over, just around the contingency? It's particular to revenue, wasn't it? Yes, so it is. So on the high risk projects, they will have a level of contingency within them. Did that answer your question? Was that what you asked? Yeah.
It's not visible anywhere. You don't bolt that together and say there's a certain sum in for contingency on high risk, or
on revenue we don't. On capital, we could have given you a clearer answer on that, but each individual project will have its own contingency within its forecast.
So we're on to, I think, delivery assurance on the schemes in the investment fund, which is page 135 of the authority, the combined authority papers. Is there somebody?
Yes, so again, that would be Pete. If you have any questions, I can get Pete Davis
Yes, that
up
would be
here.
good.
Okay.
I've certainly got some questions.
Okay.
Sorry, what's your surname?
Sorry, I'm Pete Davis. I'm head of management insurance.
Lovely, thanks very much. So, I mean, I think my question on delivery assurance is really about sort of single page reporting and kind of management by exception. You know, whether we can get more of a sense of a dashboard of what's doing well, you know, what's got a red light against it, what's on amber and what's on green. And so, you know, whether there's some sort of, what's the thinking around, you know, management overview, you know, dashboard reporting to really pick out the issues that matter, because we're kind of wading through quite a lot of detail. So that would be my first question. And then the second thing is, you know, and it's linked to that, is whether on the projects that we're putting in place that we can get a sense of performance by unitary authority as well, so that actually, you know, we can start to, you know, we can see which of the unitary authorities are performing better on delivering their projects and which are, you know, there might be some that are consistently, you know, under budget. There are some that consistently over budget, and the same with time frames. So getting a sense of a kind of visibility around that, because I think that will also help the culture as a combined authority, you know, to be looking at performance. So those are the two things really.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I can have a attempt at answering this. I think it's a very valid point. The report cover is kind of a process report, isn't it, about managing change? And it doesn't really provide a very helpful flavour of how those programmes are performing, which I concede. I think that's something that we're looking at. The report mentions changes to the way that we govern our programmes and particularly change management and reporting. We've got a new head of performance in the combined authority. It's something that we recognise that we need to take a stronger position on. We also have a programme management office, which is now moved into a corporate space from infrastructure, with the plan to do more around programme management across all of our programmes, not just those in infrastructure, which should be able allow us to provide a better on how those projects are performing. Clearly, CRSTS is one of our major focus because of its scale and the challenge of capital delivery. And I think we're already in a position where we do regular reporting on the schemes within the CRSTS programme, how they're delivering against their budgets, which is also included in the budget reports, of course. But in terms of delivery milestones, I think that's a good, strong approach from the led by the Programme Management Office, and something that we should be seeking to roll out across all of our programmes.
Thank you very much. Any further questions for Pete? I mean, I've got one, sorry, further one linked to that, and this is something that a member of the public has raised with us, which is whether what kind of risk assessment we've got around late delivery of CRSTS projects in terms of actually, you know, the impact on our future funding if we're not able to kind of deliver our projects on time. And Stephen,
well, so we have a quarterly risk reporting regime, which I think has come.
No, it normally goes to audit committee.
But you will well imagine that we have a very, very clean eye on that issue between ourselves and the unitary authorities. I think one of the challenges is, to what extent do we allow these to be tools for improvement rather than, dare I say it, for discord? And I think that's the danger with all these things, where potentially, and I say this hypothetically, if you were looking at projects that weren't delivering in one unitary authority and there was a cracking project in another one, in a perfect world, you'd have that civilized discussion, wouldn't you?
Yes.
That's the world we need to get to. We are getting there, and often it does work quite well. And I think the mutually assured, you know, disbenefit of money going back to government always focuses mine.
Yes.
Some of that stuff you'll know this, is best done privately. And then when we've decided how that should be, then politicians and officers can be accountable to the public. But no one wants to fail, least of all in public. Disagree privately by all means.
Yes. Okay. So carrying that balance between, you know, what's in the public domain and at least having the reassurance that the right things are going on behind the scenes and having that dialogue on an ongoing basis. Toby.
So I was going to ask a question related to that later, but since we're on the topic now, it makes sense. So a few committees ago, we had a list of projects, like backup projects, come forward of these are all the things we'll do if the big CRSTS schemes can't be delivered. As far as I know, none of those have yet been taken forward, and they will, although they're quicker projects, they will still take a few years from design to implementation. When's the sort of crux point where we make that call?
I think to answer the question, it's happening already and it's happening all the time. So some of those projects that you might call on the backup list will be projects that are already in motion and which have, for historical reasons, not been part of CRSTS, for example. Some of it will therefore be a question of managing a portfolio that uses not just CRSTS, but potentially other funds, but which is totally fine and will get DFT support. So we have signaled this to DFT. They are happy with those that are on that list. And we're working very closely with our UA colleagues to ensure that if we're having them on a list, that, to your point, we're not just leaving them on a list to feel that to find that they can't get through, they can't deliver in time. So we're really now working very dynamically. The other element of it, of course, is what happens after CRSTS. And you'll have heard noises from various quarters that, you know, we need to recognise transport infrastructure spending just doesn't stop in 2027. You know, we've continued to have good conversations with DFT that stop short of a commitment they cannot make, clearly. But everybody recognises that, you know, that if something is half finished in March 2027, that's no good for anyone. So we have formally over-programmed by 25% anyway, and that's an increase. I think we talked about that last time. But we are in active discussions with DFT and our UA colleagues, as are all mayoral combined authorities, because we've all got the same challenge. You know, when real life intervenes in a perfect program, you never end up with a program at the end that you thought you were going to deliver at the start. We just have to make sure that we keep our eye on what's the most strategically sensible use of the money. And I think we're getting better at that too, because CRSTS 1 was a very fast process of coming up with a list of great projects. I think CRSTS 2 will be far more informed by things like our local growth plan and what is the economic as well as the social gain that we'll get for the projects. So I think it's a really improving picture, and the pressure is quite useful to us right now.
Thank you, Steve.
We'll keep applying it then. Pressure.
Oh, always welcome.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think we're segueing into the update on the transport infrastructure projects. Is there anybody else?
Yeah. So I think that's Ben and is it Chris? Yeah. Pete.
We've got 20 minutes left, so I think we're probably okay for the three agenda items. I mean, we've had some coverage of the transport projects. So thanks very much. Any further questions on the transport infrastructure projects? No.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry.
Apologies. So you might want to correct me if I got it all wrong. But
lovely.
Toby.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't quick fire enough. With the North Filton station, it looks like we're aiming to keep the timeline the same or even faster, but the report is a bit coy about when that end date, sort of entry into service, actually is.
I'm afraid I've had to be deliberately coy because I don't know the cost of the acceleration yet. We're in conversations with Network Rail, and it will be subject to other commercial conversations we have with the delivery partner as well. So I would like to bring back an update in June committee, and that's when I'll be giving further information. But at the moment, I don't know, so I can't inform the committee.
Just one more question on North Filton. Why wasn't the necessary capacity for the arena events foreseen at the design stage that's already happened?
So the capacity was based upon, or the information, the requirements was based upon previous rules and requirements. Following the Manchester Arena bombing, there's been changes to the requirements for the station, and therefore that has to be informed in the new design, updated design process.
I think that relates to the security requirements, but there's kind of two separate axes as far as I'm aware. One is about the capacity for passenger numbers, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, certainly. So I think there's been ongoing conversations with the developer around the capacity of the arena, and obviously part of that is also working with partners like GWR Network Rail around the trains per hour, what's available capacity on the line as well. So that's why it needs to be thoroughly looked through as part of the next design phase.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Hodge.
Yes, so I had a point to make to that paper and I've forgot it. I've got it now. About the delegation and the reducing bureaucracy, and that's really welcomed. And I wanted to get a message at a national level that even with that, could we have some flexibility with the deadlines at March 27? Hopefully they might be a bit pragmatic about some of the funding, because we're all chasing the same construction companies, and even if performance is 100%. That is a worry about that delivery.
We're in discussions, as I've said, but that's more to ensure that we can all, and the supply chain is part of this, all plan for a world beyond March 27. I think it wouldn't be safe to assume we'll get the ability to carry money forward in a world which is so fiscally constrained. I think that's that would be a dangerous assumption. So we're certainly not being complacent about the idea of rolling it forward. In fact, previous time-limited transport capital funds, there have been some, but not much discretion. So I think we should plan to have to invest the money and be as flexible, creative, and strategic as we can be. But I don't think we should assume we'll get any joy by asking for an extension.
Thank you. I just want to raise, I think in a couple of places in the reports, there's been kind of comments on further delegated authority. I think there's always a kind of an interesting balance to strike between what power is sitting with officers and what power is sitting politically. And I would expect the unitary authorities to defend the political decision-making, the process as well. I just think it's something that needs to be kept an eye on as a sort of interesting point of flex.
Absolutely agree. Noting that 90% of the projects are delivered through unitary authorities, so therefore they are subject to their own internal governance. So what we're actually trying to do is deduplicate in many cases. Why would we have to assure something they're assuring through the same process? An example of some sort of marginal gains, to use that term, that we've sort of been working on real time, and actually that's begun to have a really positive effect. But your point about delegations is true. We must be careful what we wish for.
Yeah.
I think it's just that double sort of doubling up, which seems to be avoidable, and I think that's what that mostly is dealing with.
Yeah, avoiding double handling is to be supported wherever possible. Thank you. So I think we're on to the strategic placed partnership with Homes England. Is someone here to speak?
So that's Jess Lee.
Lovely. Yes, please. If you could just give us a little bit of an overview of what that involves.
So this place partnership one, yes. So the paper seeks the agreement from the committee for a delegation for the combined authority to enter into a strategic place partnership with Homes England. So this is sort of formalising of the relationship between the combined authority and Homes England, and it's consistent with the approach that's being taken with a number of combined authority areas around the country. And the purpose of the strategic place partnership will be to bring more resources and investment into the region to deliver our homes and regeneration priorities, and that will be based on an agreed pipeline of priorities, which is part of the work that needs still to come, which will be worked up between the combined authority, the unitary authorities and Homes England, and deliver our ambitions from the local growth plan and from the unitary authorities' local plans. And there's a draft of the memorandum of understanding that's attached, but it's not yet finalised.
Super. Could I ask how it fits with the deferred spatial development strategy? Because obviously, if we've got a regional plan, it makes much more sense to have conversations about it with Homes England. So how does that fit?
Well, so at the moment, local authorities are all developing their own local plans in the absence of a SDS across the region. The local growth plan is also developing a clear sense of the priority areas in the region and how we are going to deliver on our housing requirements associated with our economic opportunities. In parallel with that, this piece of work allows us to consider what the prioritisation of those places needs to be, where our really big areas of opportunity for housing development are, which we can then proceed with those conversations with Homes England. In parallel, we're thinking about what an SDS looks like. So all these things are happening in parallel with each other.
So it's happening in parallel, the regional spatial development strategy, because there's certainly an expectation from government that that work is going to need to be done by the combined authorities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I'm just a little bit nervous. I understand the reason behind it, but you talking about double handing. Oh, sorry. A bit nervous on this. You were talking about the issues of double handing, where we're doing one thing and the local authorities are doing another. Well, we don't actually have, as a regional authority, the spatial plan that just never really came about. For whatever reason, I'm not going to go over that again. But if the councils themselves have their own arrangements with Homes England, then we're going to have our own arrangement as WECA with Homes England. Are we not venturing into the area of double handing?
So I think the amount of money that Homes England has invested in the West of England, most of it isn't in partnership with local authorities. It's actually with housing associations direct. One of the benefits of this approach, which is being adopted everywhere in all Mayoral combined authorities, is to give us a greater say and greater sight of what these investments are and what they will be. Because if you are, about to open a railway station and there's a housing development next door, you might want to tie those things together. Whereas at the moment, it's really, really hard because the information that Homes England has is confidential. So we don't see it. So that's a very simple example of where we can be better at almost today's portfolio and how it's used to deliver the biggest bang for the buck for the taxpayer. So in terms of our own internal capacity, yes, we have very limited capacity. And that's a decision that was taken for historical reasons, as you say, we don't need to go into, but we are absolutely aware that this is a growth area we're expected to grow into. New powers, potentially new funding, we don't know. We'll see what the spending review and the white paper delivers, will mean more responsibility for us. So again, back to the recruitment that was referred to earlier, we are in the process of recruiting for a senior person on placemaking, homes and regeneration, because we can't do this without that kind of capability in-house. So I'd say it's a natural evolution of the organisation's role, which follows a national template and allows us to get more out of the relationship we already have with Homes England.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions on the Homes paper? Thank you. Then we're on to the. Thank you very much.
It's just as well.
Onto the transformation programme. The best value. Okay, very good. Do you want to give us a little bit of a summary?
Yes, absolutely. So the paper updates on the transformation programme and on the best value notice, and it recommends that the committee approves the streamlining of our reporting on ongoing organisational improvement activity. So all the open actions from the transformation programme will come under the organisational improvement plan that Stephen's talked about and was in the budget paper. The paper also updates on the BVN, including the report of the chair of the Independent Improvement Panel, and it notes that government will need to decide on whether the notice is going to be extended or not by the 5th of March, which is the date that its current notice expires, and that we will come back to committee with a proposal for the oversight of ongoing improvement activity when we know the outcome of that BVN decision from government. I think Stephen mentioned earlier, since the paper was published, the BVN panel have met again on Friday, and good progress continues there, and they've agreed a set of principles for working collaboratively, which will be shared along with, as Stephen mentioned, progress on the deputy mayor role and expectations there. So work is continuing.
Any questions? Toby?
Yeah, just if they do choose to extend in March, is there a minimum time period? Like, do they extend for a year at a time, or how does that work?
Well, if we look at the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough example, they extended their notice for 6 months. So but I think it will depend a bit on government's view on how progress has been made.
Thank you. No more questions. I think the other thing that I wanted to pick up on was that one of the things which came through from the independent improvement panel was the authority needing to be clearer about what its purpose was. And I was slightly concerned, as I said to Stephen on Friday, that the work on clarifying what the purpose of the authority is being kind of delegated upwards at a national level. I think given the rather unusual nature of the arrangements that we've got in place in this combined mayoral authority, I personally think that some work needs to be done within the authority around what the purpose is as an authority. So that would be a comment that I would make. I don't know if other members have a comment on that.
Do you want to just,
yeah.
So I think that we have the opportunity with our local growth plan work to define what it is we're trying to achieve as a region collectively between the unitary authorities and the combined authority, and how we go about achieving that, what everybody's role is in the delivery of our ambitions for the region, I think is where we get into the conversation about what the purpose of the combined authority is, where we're needing to deliver at a regional level versus within the unitary authorities, and whose responsibility is what. We've got a bit of an opportunity through the local growth plan to almost define that with real examples.
Yes, I think it's a really helpful piece of action learning.
Yeah.
And I think there's a supplementary piece around the authority itself being explicit around its own purpose to make it clear for everybody.
If I may, just the other piece being the investment strategy, which we are looking now, I think June. Obviously, we need to talk to a new mayor about this, but the idea that you've got a plan, and then you need to have something that says, and how do we invest against the plan? That's the other piece of the jigsaw. Yeah. So these things are all moving. It's never perfect, but they're never going in perfect order. But because obviously the national stuff is driven entirely up there, so we are sort of moving all things on at the same time. But our investment strategy is critical, because it's all possible. It's possible to agree anything if you have infinite money and infinite time. If you have to make really hard choices, as I think we've now entered the period where most of our money has been allocated, and so the next set of investment choices are really going to be tough compared to the first set, I would say, as an authority. And that's good, because it will force the best ideas to the surface. You need a framework for that conversation.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. There's clearly a kind of huge range of activities going on, and lots of really good work taking place there. Thank you very much. So I think that draws us to the end of the meeting. And I don't know if there's any further feedback to myself as chair, but I'll be submitting a chair's statement to the joint committee and the main committees on Friday this week. So please let me know if there's any kind of issues or comments you'd like me to consider including in my comments for Friday. So thank you very much, everybody. And as Jill pointed out to me, we've had full attendance today, which I think is, Jill was saying, is the first time. So very much appreciated.